Thomas Holden was a man who once epitomized stability and contentment. At 42, he had built a respectable career as a senior architect in a prominent firm in the city. His wife, Evelyn, was a 38-year-old public relations specialist known for her charm and poise. They had been married for 15 years, sharing a seemingly perfect life in their upscale neighborhood. Their social circles were filled with the city's elite, and their weekends were often spent at lavish parties and charity events. Evelyn had always been the center of attention at these gatherings. Her grace and intelligence made her a favorite among her peers. However, lately, something had changed. Thomas had noticed that Evelyn had become distant and preoccupied, her once vibrant personality now cloaked in an aura of secrecy. He had chalked it up to work stress or perhaps a midlife crisis, but he could not ignore the gnawing suspicion that something more sinister was afoot. The party in question was hosted by Marcus Sterling, Evelyn's boss and a towering figure in the business world. At 55, Marcus was a powerful man with a reputation for ruthlessness. His company was a conglomerate that had its fingers in numerous high-stakes ventures, and his influence extended far beyond the boardroom. His charisma was matched only by his arrogance, and his affairs, both business and personal, were often the subject of whispered rumors. As Thomas mingled among the guests at Marcus's lavish party, he couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider in his own life. He observed Evelyn from a distance, noting how she seemed to cling to Marcus's every word. It was not the first time he had felt uncomfortable about their interactions, but tonight, the unease was more palpable. The room was filled with the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, and the soft strains of classical music playing in the background. The grandeur of the event was unmistakable, with its opulent decor and elegantly dressed attendees. Yet, amidst the glitz and glamour, Thomas felt a growing sense of dread. He excused himself from a conversation about an upcoming architectural project and made his way to the bar. There, he found solace in a quiet corner, attempting to drown out the noise and the disquiet that had settled in his chest. It was then that Marcus approached him, a smug expression plastered across his face. "Hey loser," Marcus said, leading in close enough for Thomas to smell the faint hint of expensive cologne mixed with arrogance. "I've been seeing your wife for the past year, and you didn't even notice." Thomas's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced as he processed the words, trying to maintain his composure. He looked up at Marcus, who was enjoying his reaction far too much. Thomas's eyes narrowed, and he mustered a cold, calculated response. "Just like I did with your daughter," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Oh, and we've got a surprise for you." Marcus's face turned ashen. His confident demeanor crumbled in an instant, replaced by a look of panic. Before Marcus could react further, Thomas discreetly signaled to the group of police officers who had been stationed near the entrance. They had been briefed earlier and were prepared for this exact moment. The officers moved swiftly, their presence causing a wave of confusion among the guests. The once lively atmosphere was suddenly charged with tension as the realization of the impending confrontation dawned on everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen," one of the officers announced over the din, "we have a search warrant. Please remain calm and cooperate." Thomas watched as Marcus's facade of control shattered completely. The powerful businessman, who had always been a master of manipulation, was now at the mercy of the law. The guests, caught off guard, exchanged shocked glances and whispers. But the scene was no longer about the party. It was about the unraveling of a carefully constructed empire. The officers began their search, and Marcus was led away for questioning. As the chaos unfolded, Evelyn appeared at Thomas's side, her face a mixture of confusion and concern. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. Thomas took a deep breath, his eyes locked on Marcus being escorted out. "The truth is coming to light," he said softly, "and it's going to be a long night." The following hours were a blur of police interviews and media inquiries. Thomas's phone rang incessantly with calls from reporters and curious acquaintances. Evelyn, still reeling from the shock, was left to piece together the fragments of her shattered world. The affair with Marcus had been exposed, and with it, the very foundation of their marriage was laid bare. As the night wore on, Thomas found himself reflecting on the chain of events that had led to this moment. His decision to expose Marcus was not driven solely by personal betrayal, but by a deeper sense of justice. He had been quietly gathering evidence of Marcus's illegal activities and unethical behavior for months, knowing that the man's unchecked power had caused harm to many. The unexpected turn of events at the party had been a calculated risk, but it had set in motion a series of consequences that would change their lives forever. Thomas's actions had revealed the dark underbelly of the city's elite and brought to light the complexities of betrayal, power, and redemption. As dawn approached, Thomas and Evelyn faced the daunting task of navigating the fallout from the night's events. The world they had known had been irrevocably altered, and the path forward was fraught with uncertainty. In the midst of the turmoil, one thing was clear: the revelation had marked the beginning of a new and turbulent chapter in their lives. The morning after the chaotic soirée brought a wave of media frenzy that swept across the city. News outlets were ablaze with headlines about Marcus Sterling's arrest, and the scandal reverberated through every corner of the community. The once untouchable titan of industry had been brought low, and the implications of his fall were felt far and wide. Thomas Holden had spent the early hours of the day fielding phone calls from journalists, curious about the motives behind the dramatic events of the previous night. His own emotions were a tangled mess of triumph, anger, and a lingering sense of betrayal. He had meticulously planned the exposure of Marcus Sterling, but the weight of the truth was now heavy on his shoulders. Evelyn, on the other hand, was grappling with the fallout from the revelation. The public shaming was unbearable, and her personal and professional life seemed to be crumbling around her. The media coverage painted her as the scorned lover caught in a scandalous affair, and her reputation suffered as a result. Her role as Marcus Sterling's mistress was laid bare, and the once glamorous facade of her life was now exposed for all to see. The fallout from Marcus's arrest was immediate and devastating. The company's stock plummeted, and clients began to distance themselves from Sterling's empire. The courtroom became a stage for a high-profile trial that attracted significant public interest. Marcus was charged with a slew of offenses, including embezzlement, tax evasion, and sexual misconduct involving several young employees. The accusations were shocking, and the evidence against him was damning. As the investigation continued, Thomas's role as a whistleblower became increasingly apparent. He had been working behind the scenes, compiling a dossier of evidence that implicated Marcus in various illegal activities. The information had been painstakingly gathered, with Thomas using his architectural firm's resources to uncover financial irregularities and witness testimonies that revealed the depth of Marcus's corruption. Despite the public scrutiny, Thomas remained resolute in his mission for justice. He was determined to ensure that Marcus's crimes were exposed and that the corrupt practices that had gone unchecked for so long were brought to light. The emotional toll on Thomas was significant, but his resolve was unwavering. The feeling of betrayal was still fresh, but the desire to see justice served overshadowed his personal grievances. Evelyn's life, meanwhile, was in disarray. The constant media attention made it nearly impossible for her to lead a normal life. She faced relentless questions from reporters and was subjected to harsh criticism from both the public and her former colleagues. Her career, which had once been promising, was now in jeopardy. The affair with Marcus had not only damaged her reputation, but had also eroded her professional credibility. Thomas tried to support Evelyn as best as he could, but their relationship was strained. The trust between them had been shattered, and the emotional distance that had grown between them over the past year seemed insurmountable. Evelyn's attempts to reach out to Thomas for comfort were met with a cold distance. He was consumed by the need to see Marcus held accountable, and his focus on the case left little room for empathy towards his wife's struggles. As the trial began, The courtroom was filled with a tense atmosphere. Marcus Sterling's defense team, comprised of high-powered attorneys, fought vigorously to discredit the charges and undermine the evidence presented against him. They painted Marcus as a victim of a personal vendetta, suggesting that Thomas's motivations were driven by personal animosity rather than a quest for justice. The prosecution, however, had a strong case. The evidence Thomas had provided was comprehensive and compelling. Detailed financial records, witness testimonies, and incriminating documents painted a vivid picture of Marcus's criminal activities. The courtroom drama unfolded with dramatic testimonies from former employees who described their experiences working under Marcus's reign of exploitation and misconduct. Evelyn was summoned to testify as a witness. Her appearance in court was a turning point in the trial. She was forced to confront the painful reality of her involvement with Marcus and the impact it had on her life and the lives of those around her. The testimony was emotionally charged, and Evelyn struggled to maintain her composure as she described her relationship with Marcus and the circumstances leading up to the affair being exposed. Thomas watched from the sidelines, his feelings of betrayal now intertwined with a profound sense of justice. The trial was not just about punishing Marcus, but also about shedding light on the toxic culture that had allowed his crimes to continue unchecked. Thomas knew that the outcome of the trial would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Marcus, but for everyone who had been affected by his actions. As the weeks passed, the trial's intensity only increased. The courtroom became a battleground where personal vendettas and legal arguments collided. Marcus's defense team continued to attack Thomas's credibility, questioning his motives and casting doubt on the integrity of his evidence. Despite the relentless scrutiny, Thomas remained steadfast, driven by the belief that exposing the truth was paramount. Evelyn, meanwhile, faced the harsh reality of her situation. Her career was in tatters, and her marriage was hanging by a thread. The public shaming had taken a significant toll on her mental health, and she struggled to cope with the constant barrage of negative attention. Her interactions with Thomas were strained, and the distance between them seemed to grow with each passing day. The trial continued to capture the public's attention, and the media coverage only added to the pressure. The relentless spotlight on their lives made it difficult for Thomas and Evelyn to find any semblance of normalcy. The weight of their past decisions and the consequences that followed were now fully realized. As the trial neared its conclusion, the tension reached its peak. The courtroom was filled with anticipation as the final arguments were presented. The prosecution's case was strong, but Marcus's defense team was determined to secure a favorable outcome. The verdict would determine not only Marcus's fate, but also the future of Thomas and Evelyn. The truth had been laid bare, and the courtroom drama had exposed the darkest corners of a powerful empire. The impact of the revelations was profound, and the consequences were still unfolding. Thomas and Evelyn's lives were forever altered, and the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. In the midst of the turmoil, one thing was clear: the battle for justice was far from over. The trial had been a significant step in unraveling the web of corruption and betrayal, but the journey towards redemption and healing was just beginning. The revelations had set in motion a series of events that would shake their futures and the course of their lives in ways they could never have imagined. The trial of Marcus Sterling had reached its climactic stage. The courtroom was a hive of activity, with reporters crowding the corridors, eager to capture every moment of the final proceedings. The once vibrant ballroom where the scandal had begun now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the intense scrutiny of the legal battle unfolding before them. Thomas Holden had spent the past few weeks dealing with the chaos surrounding the trial. His role as a whistleblower had placed him in the public eye, and while he had anticipated some media attention, the extent of the scrutiny was overwhelming. The sense of purpose that had driven him to expose Marcus Sterling was now tempered by the personal cost of his actions. Evelyn's situation had only deteriorated. Her life, once filled with high-profile social events and a promising career, had become a series of public embarrassments and private turmoil. The fallout from the scandal had stripped her of her former status, and she found herself isolated from her former circle of friends and colleagues. Her marriage to Thomas was on the rocks, and their interactions were marked by a painful distance. The trial had become a spectacle. Marcus Sterling's defense team had thrown everything they had at discrediting the prosecution's case. They questioned the credibility of the witnesses, challenged the authenticity of the evidence, and painted Thomas as a man driven by personal vendetta, rather than a genuine pursuit of justice. The courtroom drama was filled with heated arguments, emotional testimonies, and relentless cross-examinations. Thomas, while resolute, found the experience emotionally draining. He had anticipated that bringing Marcus to justice would be satisfying, but the trial had exposed him to a relentless spotlight and forced him to confront his own vulnerabilities. His relationship with Evelyn had suffered tremendously, and the once solid foundation of their marriage was now shaky at best. Evelyn's testimony had been a turning point in the trial. She had recounted her relationship with Marcus with raw honesty, laying bare the personal and professional turmoil it had caused. The courtroom had been filled with an air of somber reflection, as Evelyn described her feelings of guilt and regret. Her testimony had humanized the scandal, making the consequences of Marcus's actions more tangible. As the final arguments were presented, the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric with anticipation. The jury was tasked with deciding the fate of Marcus Sterling, and the verdict would have far-reaching consequences. The prosecution's case was strong, bolstered by Thomas's evidence and the testimonies of former employees who had suffered under Marcus's reign of exploitation. On the day the verdict was announced, the courtroom was packed. Thomas and Evelyn sat together in the back, their hands barely touching. The tension between them was palpable, and the weight of the moment was evident in their strained expressions. The judge called for silence as the jury's foreman stood to deliver the verdict. "Guilty," the foreman announced, his voice carrying through the room. The word reverberated with finality, and a wave of reactions rippled through the crowd. Marcus's defense team looked stunned, while the prosecution team exchanged subdued nods of acknowledgement. Marcus himself sat with a resigned expression, his once powerful demeanor now reduced to a shadow of its former self. The sentencing phase of the trial followed, and Marcus faced a lengthy prison term. The convictions ranged from embezzlement to sexual misconduct, and the judge imposed a sentence that reflected the severity of the crimes. Marcus's fall from grace was complete, and his empire, once a symbol of unchecked power, was now in ruins. For Thomas and Evelyn, the verdict was a bittersweet victory. The exposure of Marcus's corruption and the legal repercussions he faced were significant accomplishments, but the personal costs were undeniable. Evelyn's career was in shambles, and her public image had been irrevocably damaged. The couple's marriage, once a pillar of stability, was now strained and fragile. In the weeks following the trial, Thomas and Evelyn faced the difficult task of rebuilding their lives. The public scrutiny had begun to wane, but the damage done to their personal and professional lives was still being addressed. Evelyn's attempts to salvage her career were met with mixed results. Some former colleagues offered support, while others distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with the scandal. Thomas, meanwhile, focused on his architectural practice and his newfound role as an advocate for transparency and accountability in business practices. He channeled his experiences into a commitment to expose corruption and support ethical behavior in the industry. The personal betrayal he had endured became a driving force in his quest for justice. Despite their efforts to move forward, Thomas and Evelyn's relationship remained strained. The foundation of their marriage had been shaken, and the emotional scars from the ordeal were still fresh. They sought counseling to address their issues, but the road to healing was long and uncertain. The trust that had been broken would take time to rebuild, and the future of their marriage was a work in progress. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Thomas and Evelyn sat on the balcony of their home, the sky painted with hues of orange and pink. The tranquility of the moment contrasted sharply with the tumultuous events they had endured. The silence between them was heavy, but it was also filled with a sense of tentative hope. Evelyn finally broke the silence. "Thomas, I don't know where we go from here. The past few months have been devastating." Thomas nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It has been a rough road, but I think we both need to find a way to move forward. We've been through so much, and it's going to take time to heal." Evelyn reached out and took Thomas's hand, a gesture of tentative reconciliation. "I know I made mistakes, and I can't undo the damage that's been done. But I want to try to rebuild, try to find a way back to some semblance of normalcy." Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "I want that too. It's going to be hard, and it's going to take work. But I'm willing to try if you are." As they sat together, the weight of their past struggles remained, but there was a glimmer of hope for the future. The trial and its aftermath had left indelible marks on their lives, but it also offered a chance for renewal.